Continuing with our hemorrhagic fevers, I'm going to try and see if I can't get three of them in here in the amount of time that we need to record them. Hanta is our next hemorrhagic fever, and this one is one that we dealt with in an outbreak in New Mexico. This one actually comes, the vector is the rat, and it's the desert rat because what was happening in New Mexico in the desert, the rat was carrying the hantavirus, and then it would go in the barns, and when it was in the barns, it would either urinate or poop in the barn, and then people would be sweeping or baling hay out of the barn or getting their horses out of the barn or whatever, and the virus became airborne from the rat droppings, and then people inhaled it. So inhaling is the way they got it, but the vector actually for this particular virus is the desert rat. It also, this one was only about 38% fatal. It was bad, but it wasn't as bad as some of the other hemorrhagic fevers. Certainly not as bad as Ebola. It started out with flu-like symptoms, fever, muscle aches. The unique feature of this particular virus is that they had their lungs started to fill with fluid, and of course that meant that they couldn't breathe. Over time, they would feel dizzy. They would have that fluid in their lungs. They would be achy all over. They ran a pretty good high fever. And then, of course, they would bleed out. With a bleed out, you do see the blood underneath the skin. So there is an overall uh, look of bruising. And then, of course, any kind of bruise underneath the skin is a bleed, and then it just finds an exit. And a lot of times that was the pores in the skin. And of course, bleeding from the eyes, the nose, the ears, and the mouth. So, Hanta was something we did deal with in New Mexico. All right, Lassa fever is next. Now, Lassa fever, you get it. The rat is also the vector, and we don't have the particular rat that has Lassa fever, but this came from eating uncooked rat meat. Now, I know that sounds weird, but in a lot of third world countries, eating rats is a delicacy for a lot of kids. And what they would do is they would chase these rats down through the fields or in through the streets, and they would beat them with sticks till they killed them, and then they would just build a little fire right there and heat the rat up and eat it. Well, unfortunately, what they weren't doing was they didn't skin the rat. They also didn't gut the rat. I mean, if you've seen anybody kill a deer, they have to skin it and they have to gut the deer and then they can cook the meat, and they weren't doing that. So because missionaries and doctors that were working over there knew that that was what the problem was. They can't stop the kids from doing it. This is a delicacy for a lot of kids in third world countries. So what they did was they just showed them how to cook the rats. And I know that sounds crazy for us because we can go to the grocery store, but for them it's a true delicacy. So they had to learn to cook it to a temperature, and then it eradicated the disease. Again, the vector is the rat. With this one, it was a little bit more fatal than Hanta, but it was contained in more third world countries because we don't have that particular rat, so we didn't have to deal with Lassa fever. Fever, it ran a really high fever. They got dizzy, chills, and then, of course, they bled out. Okay, moving to Marburg. Marburg actually got its name from Marburg, Germany. And Marburg is more common with people that are in healthcare or in care in nursing homes or just people that are at home caring for a loved one that may be sick. So with this one, you do have to come in contact with bodily fluids. There's not, like a rat or anything carrying this one. And people who had to change bedpans or were taking blood from other patients, if they came into contact with those fluids, then they they got Marburg. Now, even though it is named after Marburg, it wasn't just contained in Marburg, but it was contained in Europe. This one is 90% fatal. So, of all of your hemorrhagic fevers, the one is the most fatal is going to be Ebola, followed by Marburg, Lassa fever, and then Hanta. And of course, the end all for every one of these diseases is a bleed out. So that's why they call them hemorrhagic fevers.